This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 18 of Here's How. In this podcast, Cork City Councillor Mick Barry talking about the possible merger of Cork City and County Councils. Also questions for Frank Daly, the chairman of NAMA, and answers, maybe, maybe not.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
NAMA has been in the papers and in the Public Accounts Committee. Frank Daly, the chairman of NAMA, wrote a piece in the Irish Times defending NAMA under the headline, "Time has come for NAMA's critics to put up or shut up." In that article he wrote, "It is right and proper that the agency is subject to rigorous scrutiny so that the people can be assured we are doing our job properly. We accept that this scrutiny is part of our job." He continued, "But it is perhaps a sign of public disenchantment that goes far beyond NAMA that those who make unsubstantiated allegations about us are able to do so, and given platforms to do so, without their claims being subjected to scrutiny of any kind." I don't want questions for NAMA to go unscrutinised. I think they should be scrutinised very carefully. I have some very specific questions that I'd like to put to NAMA and to Frank Daly and have them answer them. So I rang NAMA and I asked if he'd talk to me. I was directed to David Clerkin of Gordon MRM and told my request would have to go through him. Gordon MRM is a boutique PR firm that provides media relations and reputation management services, according to their website. It's not clear to me why NAMA should use the taxpayers' money to pay high-powered reputation management companies to take their media calls. If NAMA are doing nothing wrong, they should simply tell us what they're doing. It's also not clear why they're using the same PR firm as used by some of Dennis O'Brien's vehicles. Anyway, I contacted David Clerkin and, as they asked, I put my request in an email to interview Frank Daly. I'm sure Mr. Daly is a busy man, but I don't think that a 10-minute phone call to his office would be that big of a drain on his time, particularly since he took the time to write an article for the Irish Times saying how open he was to scrutiny. David Clerkin emailed me back and wrote, "I'm afraid Frank is not available. We will be unable to facilitate your request on this occasion." I'm a hopeful sort of person, so I rang David Clerkin and asked would he talk to me on another occasion. I offered to record an interview at a time of their choosing. I said that I'd be happy to talk to anybody from NAMA who could answer my questions. It didn't have to be Frank Daly. I asked would they answer a series of written questions. The answer was no. No, no, no. David Clerkin told me that nobody from NAMA would talk to me on any occasion under any circumstances. Nobody would answer any question, in person, on the phone, or in writing. I would get nothing ever. So much for being open to scrutiny. But I don't give up that easily. Maybe I'll never get answers, but I'm going to ask the questions anyway. The first question is the decision to sell all of NAMA's North of Ireland properties in one lot. That decision diametrically opposes the stated intention of the late Brian Lenihan, who talked about the cheapest bank bailout in history at the time NAMA was set up, whereby properties would be sold back into the market in an orderly way without depressing the price. In his Irish Times piece, Frank Daly wrote, "Some claim we should have retained the portfolio and worked it out over a period of many years. But knowing what we know about this portfolio, this would have been a costly mistake." So my questions are this. Question number 1. When was the decision made to reverse that policy first announced by Brian Lenihan? Question number 2. Was that a decision made by NAMA or was it directed by the government? Question number 3. Was a cost-benefit analysis done comparing the two options? Question number 4. Since the sale is now complete and there is no market sensitivity, will the cost-benefit analysis now be published if it exists? Question number 5. Does Frank Daly accept that this sales procedure excluded almost all the possible bidders from the market, seriously depressing the price that could be achieved for many of the individual properties? The next questions concern the possible corruption in Project Eagle. Both the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach seem to accept that there was corruption involved on the purchase side. Enda Kenny said,
"If there's an issue here, the questions that have been asked and the questions that have been answered by NAMA mean that there's nothing wrong on the seller side here. If there's anything wrong, it seems to be on the purchaser side."
And Joan Burton said,
"This is a northern matter. As you've rightly described it, this is a northern matter."
So question number 6 is, does Frank Daly accept the conclusion that the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach seem to accept, that there was corruption in the purchase of Project Eagle? Question number 7, if not, why does he believe that they, the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, are wrong? Question number 8, does he accept that NAMA should exercise extreme caution in further dealings with buyers who have been involved in apparently corrupt deals in the past? Frank Daly wrote in his Irish Times piece, "Some claim we should have got a better price, but they know that there was no bidder willing to pay more." I've read that article over and over, that sentence in particular. I think that sentence is deliberately crafted to be ambiguous, but no matter which way you read it, it's simply not true. The bottom line is that there were many NAMA debtors in the north, as Jamie Bryson and Mick Wallace have pointed out, who were willing and able to buy out their loans and pay far more than the 27 pence in the pound that Cerberus paid. Gareth Graham, for example. Mick Wallace has cited how Cerberus had deals set up to sell properties, doubling their money, before they had even concluded the purchase of the portfolio. Frank Daly wrote in his Irish Times piece, "Some claim we should have got a better price, but they know there was no bidder willing to pay more." Now he could argue that he was not referring in that sentence to individual properties, but to the portfolio as a whole, so that no bidder was able to outbid them for the whole portfolio in one lot. But no serious commentator has said otherwise. The complaint is that selling in that way, all in one go, excluded all but the most gigantic bidders and thereby depressed the price achieved for the taxpayer. So both parts of the sentence can't be true. He is demonstrably wrong. The record in the public domain is that there were people willing to pay much higher prices for parts of the portfolio. And if he is referring to paying for the whole portfolio in one go, then he's just creating a straw man, arguing against a point that was never made. So my last question is, what does that sentence mean? I'd like to ask Frank Daly, or anyone else from NAMA, all of those questions. NAMA is a lot of things, but it's certainly not open to scrutiny by me.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view...
No, we're not finished. Not quite done yet. Hang on one moment. Sometimes when I'm doing one of those little rants, especially if it names a person, I send them a draft copy just to let them have a look over it and perhaps suggest any changes if they want to dispute any of the facts. So that kind of helps me avoid making any mistakes and also hopefully deters them from suing me. So I sent a draft of that script to David Clerkin. David Clerkin emailed me back very, very quickly and he said, "William, I note you have written the following. I asked would they answer a series of written questions. The answer was no. You asked me if NAMA would put someone other than Frank Daly forward for interview. I declined this request. You did not ask me if NAMA would answer a series of written questions, so it is untrue to say I declined." Well, I thought that was a good opportunity, so I emailed David straight back and I said, "Well, since you're not declining that, will you please get NAMA to answer the numbered questions in the draft?" David Clerkin emailed me back and he said, "William, response from NAMA to your queries. NAMA has set out its position on the sale of the Northern Ireland portfolio in detail in appearances before the Public Accounts Committee on July 9 and October 1. The transcripts for these appearances, which comprehensively address the issues you raise, are available on www.oireachtas.ie. So no answers to my numbered questions.
If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
On the line, I have Mick Barry, who's a member of the Anti-Austerity Alliance, a councillor on Cork City Council and a candidate in Cork North Central in the upcoming general election. Mick, you're opposed to the merger of Cork City and County Councils. Why is that?
Well, I'm opposed to it on two grounds. I'm opposed to it on the grounds that it will significantly widen the democratic deficit that already exists within the local authority, and second of all, I'm opposed to it on the grounds that it will facilitate an agenda which includes outsourcing, privatisation and cutbacks.
Sure. On principle, though, doesn't it seem better that, more efficient that Cork should have one county council? People in Aries at one end of Cork and West Cork and people at Youghal in East Cork are both served by the same council even though they're 200 kilometres apart. Why does Cork in the middle between them have to have a different council?
Well, let's look at what the experience has been with the merger of councils in the UK, and let's have a look at what the experience with the merger of councils has been here in the Republic of Ireland, okay? Mm-hmm. So let's start with the UK experience. You began to have a serious merger of councils in the UK a little under 10 years ago. It began under New Labour and then gathered speed under the Tories, okay? It's not the sole reason for it, or maybe even the main reason for it, but undoubtedly the creation of super councils in the UK has facilitated an agenda which includes privatisation, outsourcing and cutbacks. Essentially the line of argument that's given by managerial staff, top managers in the councils is, we used to cover a smaller area and therefore provided public services to local communities. Now we have a far bigger area to cover. So our job is to make sure that the services are given, but to farm them out to other operators to do so. In many cases, private operators who do it on a for-profit, albeit contract basis.
Okay, I understand, Mick, you come from a left-wing background and you don't want privatisation. But if you have a look at what's actually happening in the UK, and you give UK as an example, in the whole of the UK, there's 4 chief fire officers. Cork City Council has 1 chief fire officer and Cork County Council has another chief fire officer, and they're both fairly well paid. Why do they need that duplication of services?
I reversed the question around because to go back to that example of the UK, you had a survey done by KPMG this summer which found that in 94% of councils in the UK now, including the new super councils, either services or assets were being privatised. And you give the example there of the fire service. I don't think we want public services like the fire service outsourcing or privatisation.
I know that comes from your ideological background, that you're opposed to privatisation, but really isn't efficiency something that's required? And if you were to resist privatisation, don't you need to show that the public service can be efficient?
It's not an ideological question. It's a question of good quality, decent public services for the communities that are within the council areas. I do not believe that a for-profit system will prioritise the needs of communities. By its very definition and nature, it will prioritise the profits of the owners and the shareholders. So let's have a practical example again now, but let's look at...
Well, can I give you one other example? Sure. The Cork City Libraries have one online library service whereby people can borrow e-books online. That's essentially have them emailed to their Kindle or their e-reader. And Cork County Council Library have an entirely separate duplicate system that does more or less the same job, but is entirely differently set up. Doesn't that indicate that there's huge inefficiencies?
If you follow through the logic of your argument there, we would have one local authority for the entire country, right? Because one will always trump two in a situation like that. So why draw the line at a border of a county? Why not have one or two local authorities for the entire country?
Can I give you another suggestion? Why are the local authorities, and you're a member of Cork City Council, you have been for quite some time, why are the local authorities not themselves proactively eliminating those inefficiencies?
I'm quite open to the idea of cooperation between library services between the City Council and the County Council. What I am completely opposed to is the forced amalgamation of councils, which bring about situations like you have in Limerick at the moment. Now, Limerick City Council and Limerick County Council were amalgamated, I think, last year. The buzzword in the council at the moment is equalisation, harmonisation of services. And of course, in the context of a government which supports neoliberal policies, which is cutting funding for councils, harmonisation almost inevitably means harmonisation downwards. So, for example, in Limerick, you have a bin waiver in both the city and the county. The bin waiver is being harmonised down in the city towards the county level. Mm-hmm. The amount of money spent on housing maintenance is being harmonised down towards the county level, and as I say, a lesser standard of services for communities. And an interesting point that arises from this is the debate that's taken place in Cork on the issue of the merger of the two councils has tended to be a zero-sum game, with people in the city saying it's bad, people in the county saying it's good. What we're saying is that for communities in both the city and the county, this is a bad move which should be opposed by communities in both areas.
Do you think, Mick, that there's a possibility that this is the outplaying of a turf war between civil servants or council, be it city council or county council employees, who are just protecting their own turf?
There can be an element of that, but my concern is not the turf wars between senior officials. My concern is the needs of communities, particularly working class communities that the Anti-Austerity Alliance would try to represent. Let me give you an example. Mm-hmm. There is a huge democratic deficit in local government. Partly that is down to the fact that elected representatives have their powers restricted, with many of their powers in recent years being given over to unelected officials, such as city managers, county managers. Mm-hmm. Number two, there are many things that elected councillors and, in fairness, many officials would like to do in terms of provision of services. That's impossible because of the straitjacket of funding cutbacks that's been imposed by central government. Those are two examples of a democratic deficit. This will add a third one to it. How can working class communities in areas like Mayfield and Grana-Broher have their voices heard within the forum of a huge super council which has representatives from the border of Kerry to the border of Limerick, and so on? It makes the local government situation even more undemocratic than it already is, and that's saying quite something.
Mick, I have to say, on some level, I agree with you that there's a huge amount of reform needed within local authorities, and that very often they're not run for the people they're supposed to be run for. There's an element of producer capture. They're being run for the people inside the organisation. But don't you think your campaigning efforts, and I know that you're a very active campaigner, don't you think your campaigning efforts should be more focused on reform than on preventing this particular amalgamation?
I think that if you want to have genuine reform in local government, including genuine reform in local government in the Cork area, that's opposing a retrograde forced merger is the first step. I'm not saying maintain the status quo. I'm in favour of more powers for elected members as opposed to unelected officials. I'm in favour of more funding for local authorities so that they can reverse the cuts. But it has to be done on a good sound basis, and the merger is certainly not that in my view.
Mick Barry, the Anti-Austerity Alliance councillor on Cork City Council, also candidate in the forthcoming election in Cork North Central. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you, William. Anytime.
Make your view heard. Dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
That's almost the end of episode 18 of Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, published on 18th of October 2015. References for everything that I mentioned on the show are listed in this episode's page on the here'show.ie website. If you can think of a topic or want to suggest someone to include, and that could be you, then let me know. If you like the podcast, please go on iTunes and write a nice review. Also, please like the show on Facebook. Please follow @Here's How Podcast on Twitter. And of course, subscribe to the show. You can use iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or any other podcast app or software. You can do all of that or get in touch with the show right from www.here'show.ie. And, by the way, Here's How is a finalist in the Blog Awards Ireland, due to be held on the 22nd of October. The next show will be uploaded shortly. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.